welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where we dive into the latest trends and technologies shaping our businesses, our lives, and even our world. So I'm your host, Neil C. Hughes, and today I've got a great guest joining us to discuss Accenture's latest cloud outcomes report, which is titled The Race to the Cloud, Reaching the Inflection Point to Long-Sought Value. And her name is Ashley, and she's going to help us understand the findings of this report and what they mean for businesses and organisations in today's cloud-driven world. And Accenture's research highlights the importance of cloud commitment, the benefits of being a heavy cloud adopter, and also the barriers organisations still face in fully realising the potential of cloud technology. So without further ado, let's dive right into the conversation right now. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Washington, DC, where Ashley will tell us all about the state of cloud adoption and its impact on businesses. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Ashley. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Neil, thank you so much for having me. I'm Ashley Skyrme, and I am a Senior Managing Director at Accenture, and I lead our global cloud-first strategy and consulting. And, what that means in shorthand is I've been doing technology strategy work for decades, and it's such a great time to be doing that. And my focus is really on business-led cloud transformation, thinking about architecture and its role in strategy, and ultimately how we work differently and build up our talent base to operate in this tech-driven world.
And I think cloud transformation is such a huge topic right now, and something that I wanted to cover on this Daily Tech podcast, and the value that it's delivering to businesses. And you probably unwittingly set off my tech spidey senses when I was reading about Accenture's latest cloud outcomes report. So can you offer everyone listening a bit of an overview on that report and some of the key findings there?
Well, yeah, and I love the title of it this year because we really labeled it the race to value. And that's really where we see cloud is. I mean, the research was, we asked ourselves, well, what is the state of the cloud market? And so that was the focus of the research. And I think it was about 800 companies, and they were across, more than 10 industries and countries. And it was primarily business and technology executives. So both views, we wanted to look at where companies were along 5 dimensions: speed, cost, business enablement, service, and resiliency, or what we call, more the security and continuity. So that was the basis of the research. And just to get us going, the biggest kind of takeaway for me was that we're really at a cloud inflection point. And so if we think just back a couple years, we hit the pandemic and there was this big push for a period of rapid migration. And so we were maybe roughly a quarter workloads, roughly in the cloud. And in this latest go around on the report, we're about 50% workloads in public cloud and 30% in private. So massive period of adoption. We'll get into that. We do think that the low-hanging fruit or getting to cloud is not what our clients are talking about. They're really living in the cloud, and they're shifting their focus to think about it's not just, one technology or this. It's what is our, technology tech stack, and ultimately how are we driving growth? So big shift. And then the only final point on that is that cloud spend is expected to outpace non-cloud spend. So that's another thing that our clients are dealing with, is that they have some of their investment in on-premise still, and they've got a rise in cloud spend. And so they live between those two worlds.
Wow, that is a big shift. And I love the title there, The Race to Value. And that's what it's all about. And also love that focus on multiple viewpoints as well. And to take one of the key stats from that report, I think it was 86% of companies have increased the scope and volume of their cloud initiatives since 2020. So I've got to ask, what do you think are the main factors that have contributed to the surge in this cloud commitment? Was it the dreaded P word or something else, do you think?
Well, I think it was almost like a perfect storm. Yeah. And if you look at the whole digital acceleration and how consumers shifted since 2020 alone, I think there was, a 14% increase in e-commerce, which took 10 years to do 10% shift in that. So that is a massive acceleration of everybody moving their habits online. And we saw that impact almost every sector in a way. From an organizational response standpoint, I mean, I'm sure you remember this, like we were working with organizations that moved rapidly to a completely distributed workforce. And so the uptick around cloud to support that, but they went further. And in our research, companies said we are going to move 85% of our business critical functions into the cloud. And it was a massive commitment. I think the third big thing in that perfect storm was the hyperscalers response. And we know some of the big cloud service providers were really investing to help companies get there. And it was significant investment. And so I think companies looked at that as an opportunity and kind of piggybacked on that, adoption wave. And then finally, those were all, let me respond to the environment. But more and more, a lot of organizations are making these big investments in AI. And I know we'll get to that because AI is the topic du jour. But they also have these disruptive cloud natives. Moderna entered the scene during COVID, and that was such an example of, these cloud native companies being very disruptive. So from my standpoint, those were some of the big drivers, and it hit everybody's living room. Like we think about these popular streaming platforms, and all of us have several of them at the ready. I mean, all of them went to cloud native, digital first, reaching millions of subscribers globally, and doubling, tripling the content. All of that streaming media came along with this big burst too. That's an example of it.
And there is no one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach in this race to value. So I'm curious, how does the progress of cloud adoption vary between heavy adopters, medium adopters, and low adopters? And maybe explain the difference in the outcomes achieved by these groups, because I suspect everybody listening is going to be scattered between those groups, right?
Yes, it's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing is, how do you define adoption? I think early on, some people thought adoption was, well, we're going to pick a public service cloud provider and we're going to migrate like the work that we do today into the cloud. And from our view, adoption is not that. That's like the first step in adoption. So I think thinking about how you define it is important. What we have noticed in the research and just with our clients, there's almost an adoption paradox happening right now. And what I mean by that is you've had this rapid surge to get to the cloud, but there's still, despite that surge, 58% of the leaders in our research said they are not getting the outcomes they expected. It didn't mean they got zero outcomes, but they are not fully satisfied with the outcomes. That is a massive number of people that said, we are fully invested here, but we're not getting what we see. And I think a couple points on like the upside downside of that. The upside is that there is a small group of heavy adopters. And this is both in our cloud outcomes research, as well as our total enterprise reinvention research. And let's say this is kind of a group that's 13% or less that are truly leading the pack. And those that are leading the pack, it's significant outcomes, like 5x the revenue than their peers. Pre-COVID, it was 2x revenue. They're 2 to 3 more times likely to innovate. They get better results on the cost outcome. So the upside is there's a lot of upside. The bad part of that is there's not enough companies that are achieving that. It's a very small group of these leaders. And I'm sure we'll get into it. For the lower adopters, 21% say we are achieving our outcomes. That is a really low number. So we should, we'll get into it as like, well, what are those challenges? And what we've noticed year on year, there's some persistent challenges that they're seeing.
21%, that really is a shocking figure. And I think as companies continue their cloud journey, ambitions do, though, appear to be expanding beyond just cost savings, and experience seems to be rising to the top of the table as well. So can you elaborate on some of those complexities and challenges that you mentioned there that organizations might be facing as they invest more and more in the cloud?
Yeah, this for us, when we looked at this and with our clients, these are persistent challenges. So it's not like, oh, we hit one set of barriers in year one and now we're hitting a second set of barriers. These have been pretty consistent. I think before we go into the ones that were like toply rated, I would say working with a number of organizations, we see this phenomenon of the double bubble where, you've got these mounting cloud costs as well as the investments that you made in legacy. So that's a double bubble of costs. And from the standpoint of the most elusive outcome we saw was cost. That's the one everybody is the least satisfied with. And some of our clients feel themselves stuck in the middle because they've finished the low-hanging fruit of migration, and now they have to transform complex big mainframes that have been there potentially for decades. So that's kind of a overarching statement, is that is a moment in time where you're facing this double bubble. I think some of the things that came up consistently, there really was a top four. I think one is the complexity of the business and operational change and that alignment between business and IT. In the past, it was like the business said, here's what we want, and IT took those orders. But now, business and technology are working together in a much different way, and it's complex. I think the second big one is around security and compliance. This term gets thrown around data sovereignty and how you're operating in different countries and how do you remain compliant and secure when we know a breach can cause a massive financial and brand impact. And then finally, the other two big ones is the technology complexity. These are big organizations, invested a lot. They have a skill base that may have been tied to that old technology, and they're really looking around how do we get more cloud skills into the organization to be able to manage the change.
And as we dive a little bit deeper into the report, it also identified security and compliant risks as one of the top barriers to cloud value. So again, I've got to ask, how can organizations overcome these challenges while still realizing the full benefits of cloud technology?
Yeah, the security one is when we talk to organizations, there's not a single organization that is not focused on security and resilience. And I would say there's a couple things that we see that can be really effective. One is when you take an architectural approach versus one technology decision at a time, and you really think about where that landscape is going to go, including security at that architecture level. It's almost like putting a blueprint out there that is secure. And companies are starting to break down these bigger systems that they had into smaller services, and security is built into those services. So to me, like the final point there is proactive, thinking about it at an architecture level, thinking about it at a global level. Like, what does it take to operate in a country like China versus North America, as an example? I think the second point I would say is around automation and standards. So if you think about, like, a number of our clients are putting in, this is a little techie, but a control plane, which allows them to manage across different cloud providers, different SaaS providers with common standards and processes, is the more you can automate security, the more you improve your risk posture because you reduce the human error, you get people using those standards. So those would be the three things that I would say most organizations are doing consistently.
And another top barrier mentioned in the report is the complexity of business and operational change. And I suspect as I read that line out there, there'll be business leaders listening all over the world nodding in agreement. I think it just resonates with everyone. So on that side of things, what strategies can companies adopt to successfully navigate these complexities during their cloud journey?
this one gets to the heart of like what I love to do, because I mean, I've always said cloud is as much an operating model as it is a technology. And I know that could be controversial to some, but we don't struggle with the technology. We struggle with what I call the surround sound. And I think the first big thing is looking at cloud as a growth driver versus a cost center. And when you do that, you can cut through the complexity and say, well, what are the industry or AI-focused use cases that I want to do? So, for example, if I'm in life sciences and I know that I have a long time to get drugs to market, and I say, I put a big goal out there, I want to increase productivity by 50% using cloud-based technologies, then everybody gets focused on what is that outcome. So that's a way to cut through the complexity, which is to really give it a very targeted, high-value business case. I think the second thing is around how the business and technology work together. So, for example, we were working with an organization, and their question was, should we change from this waterfall plan, build, run model? And prove it to me. And I remember when we looked into it, what we ended up seeing is that they really had a plan, build, run. So they spent 60% of their effort before they even got to a line of code. So the idea that you simplify these silos and you change how you work to cut some of that planning out and get to more, proof of concepts and then iterate on that. So you get more value out of that time is a second big way to cut through that complexity. And then the last one, we all do it, which is follow the money. Mastering cloud economics is a big topic. And I think if you have a business case and you know what you're doing and you can use some of these modern tools to get like real time, like how am I spending and am I getting the value out of it? If you do those three things, I think it can cut through the complexity of trying to boil the ocean.
And to bring everything that we're talking about today to life and hopefully maybe even inspire a few business leaders along the way, can you share some maybe best practices or even success stories of companies that have been on this journey and effectively overcome some of these barriers we've talked about and gone on to realize the full value of their cloud investments? Because I think that just brings it to life and hopefully will inspire a few people.
Well, Neil, you cleverly asked me a lot of questions that brought through some of the practices. So I'll quickly summarize them and then maybe give a couple examples. But the questions that you asked me along the way around security and business, like we have 5 key practices that we identified through the research and through our work. And one is around that prioritizing the business/industry advantage. So we talked about that as finding those high value use cases. The second big one we talked about, and I want to reiterate it, is, leaders look at it as the digital core. They don't look at it as just the cloud, and they're thinking about their architecture as a way to get competitive advantage. So we've heard people say every company is a technology company. Well, you need a tech stack to be a technology company. I think the third big one is around data and AI. There is not one of those leaders who is not like way more advanced than their peers in the data AI space. Model, we talked about that. How do you really focus on people? I call that the art and the science, and then ultimately cloud economics. So those are the 5 big practices. When I think about the companies that has inspired me, there's one kind of large fast food chain, and they, in 2 years through their cloud transformation, doubled their market cap. And they came in with self-service kiosks, new customer channels when we saw the uptake of curbside delivery, or these very hyper custom loyalty programs. We see those in our day-to-day life, but do we always connect that they doubled their market cap? I mean, that's a pretty significant change in their business profile from their cloud transformation. I think another one that the banks, I think some of the banks are really doing some fascinating things. And I think about this one it was a very strong, like large regional bank. And they had this big goal to go from, instead of wanting to be a bank, they said, we want to be a digital bank. And more than that, we want to be a fintech business group. And what they meant by that is that they were going to move kind of their core business online, and then they were going to think about new business models. And, just on a user-based standpoint, I think they started out reaching 2.5 million people, and they have these big goals of reaching 200 million, and they're on track to do that. And they're doing a lot of things in Web 3.0 and blockchain. So to me, that's somebody that's willing to challenge like their core business and completely move into using the digital technologies to compete with the fintech. So really cool example.
Well, I'm now going to ask you to take a little peek into the virtual crystal ball here and ask you to look towards the future. I mean, what trends do you anticipate in cloud adoption and how companies will continue to evolve their cloud strategies to remain competitive in the marketplace? Because the world's moving so quickly at the moment. You mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, Gen I, and how quickly that's changed everything. I'm curious, as you look towards the future, is there anything that excites you?
Yeah, we wish we all had a crystal ball, but I think, the look ahead, I think around cloud is like an offensive strategy. It's really looking at, reinvention and the digital core as a strategy. It's not a how, it's a big focus to be, setting a new performance frontier is how we like to say it at Accenture. I think the second one is, given the environment, a lot of the clients are more judicious about their technology investments. So it's not just a cost business case anymore, it's a return on investment business case, and they're all looking for sustainable cost transformation. From the top investment areas, and we've all seen this, organizations are not stopping the technology investments. And some of the three big areas we see is around what we call industry and AI focused cloud investments. And so your example on Gen AI, in a recent study that we did, and frankly, all of our organizations are talking about it, 98% of the business leaders look at AI foundation models to significantly upend big portions of their business. It's almost like an iPhone moment we're having with AI. And our clients are starting to really look at use cases, particularly around customer service or supply chain, where this is applicable. We talked a lot about the digital core. And when we say digital core, it's the integrated set of investments in cloud, data, AI, security, automation. That is still here to stay. And then finally, organizations are still investing in their talent. Like they are significantly investing in changing the culture and upskilling their talent. They realize there's not enough talent out in the market to hire it, and they need to make some of that, they need to build that talent themselves. So those would be some of the three big areas that we see are hot. What's hot?
100% with you, especially around Gen AI and that iPhone moment. And I think when plugins become ready available and businesses can plug it into Gen AI, that will almost be the App Store moment as well. But I cannot thank you enough for sharing both of your time and your insights with me today. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to share one other thing for everyone listening, as that is a book that you can recommend that means something to you that will add to our Amazon wish list. All I'm going to ask is, what would you like to leave us with and why?
So I will leave a book. It's a kind of a current interest of mine, but I really got on this 10% happier bandwagon and with Dan Harris, and he had this Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor on his show, and she is a neuroanatomist, and she wrote 2 books, one, My Stroke of Insight, and 2, Whole Brain Living. And essentially the gist of it is she had a stroke and lost half of her brain, went offline, and she had to use the other half of her brain to rebuild it. And what she learned in that process around like how you can replace the fear, stress, anxiety response that our human brain can have with a more connected, creative dimension, that is what I learned from her. So this whole idea of whole brain living that she learned from having a stroke is fascinating to me.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful. I'll be checking that out and I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. And for anybody listening that would like to maybe look at that report that we've referenced today in more detail, Accenture is a big site. Where would you point everyone listening to?
So I would point us to Accenture.com.
Yeah.
And I would type in race to value and you will get that report. I think a second big piece of work that we did that underpins that is the cloud continuum. And there is a lot of nuggets in there with great client examples that, show what good looks like for cloud transformation.
Well, I think we covered a lot in a short amount of time there, from how cloud has become a mandate and no longer an option. And yes, cloud commitment has surged with, I think, 86% of companies reporting an increase in the scope and the volume of their cloud initiatives since 2020. And they are achieving greater outcomes, but also there is some of those stubborn barriers from the past that they're having to overcome. I think we've covered so much. I'd love to invite people listening to share more of their story, but more than anything, just thank you for giving an overview of that report today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Neil.
So a huge thank you to Ashley for discussing the key findings from Accenture's latest cloud outcomes report. And I think we've learned so much about the increasing commitment to cloud initiatives, the advantages experienced by heavy cloud adopters, and also the persistent barriers that organizations need to overcome to fully leverage the benefits of the cloud. And let's be honest, as the cloud journey continues to evolve and become more complex, I think it's more crucial than ever for businesses to stay ahead and make informed decisions. But as I said a few moments ago, I want to bring you into the conversation. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Send me a DM on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes, and let me know your thoughts on anything we talked about, or if anything sparked a new idea in you. And as always, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review us on your favourite podcasting platform. It really does help the show against the algorithms and also helps us attract great guests like Ashley on here too. So thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.